Ruto allies tell of Odinga whether or not to call a plebiscite to implement some of the proposals made by the National Dialogue Committee. And the report appears, according to the paper, to be the next battleground for the president and the Azimio leader, Raila Odinga. The outcome of such a vote, says the paper, in the president's first term could determine the winner of the 2027 contest, and both camps are aware of this and are alive to that reality. That story is further highlighted on pages number 4 and 5, says the big dilemma on why Ruto camp has opposed Azimio's referendum call and the change that requires the plebiscite. On Saturday, the Kimani Ichung'wah and the Kalonzo Musyoka-led National Task Force had released some of the areas that they agreed upon. Fundamentally, on the disagreement was what attracted the attention of Kenyans. This included the failure to reduce the VAT on fuel from 16 to 8%, and also the contentious issue of the housing levy, which in this week was equally declared unconstitutional by the High Court. Among the other areas that they agreed on included the creation of the leader of official opposition in Parliament with 2 deputies and the entrenchment of the Prime Cabinet Secretary's position in the Constitution. This as the ODM chief demanded the people's input on offices of the opposition leader and also that of the Prime Cabinet Secretary. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time. I wonder whether you have been heard, and starting with you, Angel, and if yes, were your recommendations considered? If no, why do you think there has been systematic and deliberate under-acknowledgement of young people in this country by the political elite?
Good morning, Ayub. What I see, even given with the talks that have, the report has just been issued from NADCO, we gave our submissions as young people to the committee not so long ago, and the outcomes are as they are. The government has simply refused to our agitations. It's now telling Kenyans that we have an economic agenda that they want to push and transform. We are telling them that that economic agenda that they want to push and in this country is not working. We've seen what has gone on with the Hustler Fund. We've seen the government 2 weeks ago issue an 18% treasury, a bond of 18%. That means that the government is really in turmoil in terms of economic, in terms of the economic space. But what I think, Ayub, most of all, is that I sense fear in the Kenya Kwanza government. It is afraid of going to a referendum to ask Kenyans on the main issues that they have been on a split path. I think that the Kenya Kwanza government is scared of even putting together the IEBC, because currently we cannot even have by-elections in constituencies and wards across the country. It's our right as Kenyans to be able to have representation and to be able to express that right through a by-election where necessary. So when Kenya Kwanza government refuses to go into things that have even happened in the past, because when I remember back in 2005 when there was a yes and no campaign, Mwai Kibaki went into a referendum, and if it was not that yes and no campaign, Mwai Kibaki would never have become president a second time. It was the yes and no campaign that showed Mwai Kibaki there's a problem in the country. Immediately after losing that election, that referendum, he went to restructure cabinet by putting a hold on his cabinet, restructuring his strategy, and went into winning the election in the next round. So what the Kenya Kwanza government is afraid of is going to face Kenyans and asking them, is their government working properly? Because they've said the things that they are implementing, they have the mandate from Kenyans. Now we are telling them that we need to go back to Kenyans and ask them, are they comfortable, are they content with this social contract between Kenya Kwanza and the people of Kenya?
Okay, Kelvin Ayodi, do you see yourself in the report issued by Kalonzo Musyoka and Kimani Ichung'wah?
Thank you, Ayub. In that report, there is nothing that benefits a youth. Most things that have been highlighted exactly based on the summary that we've read, you realize that most of them benefit all those top people. According to Article 260 of the Constitution, a youth is someone who is between 18 years and 34 years. So when you see those recommendations made here, for example, when you entrench the office of CS, those things that are important, those things that are important to politicians, but when you talk about things that are important to us youth and the country, at large, you realize that those things were not agreed. For example, in that report, we were told that the cost of living, the two committees, the two from both sides, Azimio and Kenya Kwanza, they did not agree. Yeah. And the cost of living is much important. So in my opinion, I would suggest that if those issues are to be brought into a referendum, let us be given an opportunity to vote separately, so that we have cost of living, have another item separately, so that we are not voting as one thing and everything passes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Mohammed, is there a satisfaction around, from the young people's perspective, in regards to the areas agreed upon by the committee and fundamentally the two areas that they disagreed upon?
Yeah, thank you, Ayub. So I think the biggest concern for young people today is because they are affected disproportionately by the high cost of living. Would have been any achievement in that line. There were two key proposals. Reduce the VAT on fuel products from the current 16% to probably zero rate it, or take it back to the 8% at worst. The other one was on the housing levy. Those two did not come out successful from that committee. However, I think there were some other achievements probably that came out of that committee, which could be good for the country. So one, of course, is on electoral justice, on how at least the lengthening of the period from the 14 to 21 days, I think, is a step in the right direction. As you could imagine, presidential election petitions are quite weighty, and the 14-day period is probably a short time. So I think in terms of electoral justice, that is a win. And if that benefits the country, I think it also benefits young people in the long run. However, key takeaways, which should have been the cost of living, did not succeed. And I don't think the youth have a lot of benefit to claim from the recommendations of that committee.
Okay, Gabriela, I mean, was this more or less a focus on what satisfies the political class and what doesn't satisfy the common mwananchi, because Kenyans expected the high cost of living to have been a major issue that the committee agreed upon in lessening the burden on the shoulders of Kenyans?
Yeah, it focused more on political positions, because first we didn't expect more about the cost of living, because our the finance bill took care of it. It is now a bill. We didn't expect more out of this committee. But you see, when the talk started, it was more of silencing the opposition leader, not to continue with the maandamano. But I think, to me, it was focusing more on creating positions for themselves, because they created office of Prime Minister and of opposition leader. It never focuses on citizens. Yeah.
Emmanuel, does it point to areas that they agreed upon and fundamentally the entire report? Because what we had was majorly what they agreed upon and what fundamentally they did disagree upon. Do you think that reflects the main reason as to why we are here, of the economic challenge that we have, rather than the constitutional issues that they largely dwelled on as a committee?
Okay, Ayub, first of all, thank you for this opportunity. And even as you listen to the views that have been aired out by the panelists, the youth, you can be able to I'm able to compile a lot of data just by listening to them. And coming from Polytrack Africa, a company that focuses on getting and gathering analysis on data, particularly to create that political insight that may be able to allow these leaders to be able to make the decisions that are very much informed, I get the perception that the ear on the ground, particularly to be able to gauge what the youth were feeling, what they wanted addressed in this particular communication, was not something that was addressed. Because when you look at matters of data, that communication, particularly from the ground, it is something that is very key. Because if you're solving something and bringing it together in the matters of a national discourse to try and bring these people together and be able to progress together. It will be very hard to do that if you do not really address the issues that are with them. And such issues can only be able to be compiled maybe together using a scientific method, a method that would be able to gauge how are people really needing our assistance on this, in this dialogue as a whole.
Yeah.
How do we respond to these challenges that are with them? Because if you do not, if you assume what is the issue of particularly the youth in Kenya, you will be solving something that will be very skewed, because you'd be moving on a perspective that is not really qualified. So in my perception, I would, rather on my independent opinion, I would say that I view a motion to try and solve a problem without really analyzing the problem as a whole in matters focused on the youth.
Okay. Angel, given that what we at the moment see, more or less according to some drafters of this constitution, as the committee more or less focusing on questions that they have framed they themselves and not addressing the economic challenges that Kenyans are facing at the moment, is it an indication of how Kenya's political establishment is selfish when it comes to its interests, government and opposition all here, and converge at a point of interest to feed from the same trough and forgetting about all the other issues, including the pressing problems that are affecting the young people?
Well, we've had misplaced priorities as a country, but the only arm or the only space that that is able to question government properly is Kenyans. If Kenyans do not put enough pressure for these issues to be put at the top of the agenda, then that becomes a different story altogether. But then, even when you look at our constitution and how it came to be, and when we talk about inequitable distribution of resources and things to do with boundaries review and so on and so forth, then we go back and ask ourselves, how did we come to get to have a Constitution of Kenya 2010? And when we look at that Constitution came at a time when the country was at a quagmire. It was just after going through a very difficult 2007 post-election violence, and then 3 years later it was necessary for us to have a Constitution that would unite the country. That Constitution was put together to solve a different issue at that time, and then that's why 10 years later or 12 years later we are coming to see that it is not really addressing the real challenges that the country is facing. It was meant to solve a particular issue at that time, to bring the country together, to show the country that we can actually, to show Kenyans that government can come to their doorstep, which is not really what we've seen, so on and so forth. But then again, it achieved a quantitative agenda other than a qualitative one. We don't feel that our laws that govern this country actually protect us and actually speak to the needs that we actually are facing today. And the world is changing. Kenya is transforming. Kenya is moving. Things are opening up. And if we do not address the challenges as they come up, if our laws are the ones that are going to keep on holding us back, then we need to go back and review what is really guiding us as a country.
Okay. Kelvin, do we have a problem with our governance structure in the task force recommending, for example, the creation of official opposition leaders' office with 2 deputies, entrenching the prime cabinet secretary's position in the constitution, or we have an economic challenge that in the first place led to the committee to sit at the Bomas of Kenya and come up with firm deliberations on how the economy can be addressed?
Yeah, in a political view, we have governance structure, but according to the law and according to the constitution, everything is clear. So you realize that most things that politicians do, it's their interest first, and then our interest comes last. And in most cases, we realize that those interests will never be met. For example, if a legislator today morning tables to a parliament that they want a pay rise, you never hear as me or Kenya Kwanza there. But when we start talking about this structure and everything, you'll see even them, you'll see each other fighting in the parliament. So, in my opinion, when it comes to political views on governance structure, there is a problem. But when it comes to law and constitution, our government is okay. And I'm wondering why politicians would want to make the country go into a political burden. We already have enough leaders that we are facing it hard to cater for their allowances, to cater for their salaries and everything else. But still, we are still thinking of adding more oppositions to make the to make our expenses as a country go high. I realize that the United States, it is so large like Africa itself, but those leaders are not even 2,000. When you join governors, those Congress together, they're not even 2,000. Here in Kenya, MCS alone are 1,500 and more, and we still want more leaders. So, and we are still saying that we have governance issue. So, in my opinion, when it comes to law, everything is okay. But when it comes to political views, we have problems.
Okay, I mean, when you, Mohammed, look at entirely how this was meant to have been the easy, immediate fix to our problems, I mean, forestall other street protests, the opposition had organized starting March into April, and before the president had called for the first bipartisan committee, which never lived up to the expectations of Kenyans, then the National Dialogue Committee, coming up with areas that largely were constitutional than the economic challenges facing Kenyans. Why do you think that there was no consensus on the major issues that Kenyans wanted answers on?
Because they never set out to resolve those issues. This was never a committee set out to resolve key pressing economic issues facing Kenyans. This was merely a political setup to settle political scores and to satisfy political ambitions. Has it achieved those ambitions, or at least those goals? I think yes, because one, it has stopped street protests which were constantly highlighting the shortcomings of this government. And of course the president gets political wins in that line to settle those fires and to make sure that those political functions are calmed. The Prime Cabinet Secretary position is not one that we need. It was, if anything, a creation of this current administration. But to now cement it in the Constitution is a desire to make sure that we have a position which we could reward our closest allies in the next and coming elections, one that will not be tested in the waters of the courts. But equally, I think there are some small political gains which could result in good gains for the citizens. One, of course, part of the recommendations was to cement the 20% allocation to counties from the current 15%. If that goes through and it goes, if that amendment to the Constitution happens, I think that is a worthwhile achievement. However, it did not solve those economic problems, or at least those issues, because it never set out to solve those. It was a political outfit set out to solve political ambitions. Okay.
Although the money that ought to be coming from the exchequer to the county is minimum 15%, and you can upscale that up to 35%.
Yes,
and you don't need an amendment for that.
You're right. Yeah. But the thing is, the absence of that that sort of constitutional mandate, it becomes one of political goodwill, whether we want or not. Part of his campaign promises was, we were going to take that to 35%, but immediately they come, we do not see any attempt to do that, because they do not want more money going to counties. But when we have at least a constitutional mandate, what we get is a minimum rise of 5% from the current 15%.
Yes, Andrew, bringing you in. What's your take of generally the outcome, speaking for the first time?
Thank you, Ayub. I think because I came in later, I've had to struggle with so many things, but we thank God for that. Now, first and foremost, I think we need to look at the report from the perspective of what exactly it was intended to do and why the committee was formed in the first place. You'll realize that there were almost 2 committees that were formed before we had the final committee that then gave us this report. And that speaks to the question that you asked at the very onset. The question that, is the place of the youth secured in the entire process? The first committee had very youthful MPs and senators who were involved in the process. But there was a lot of hue and cry from particularly the opposition, who thought that the issues that were to be dealt with in this country were too complex for that demography, for particularly the young people. They could not understand. And I remember even at the conception of the committee that dealt with the BBI, there was cry as well. And I remember Senator Sakaja then and a lot of other young legislators putting a lot of pressure on the president, then Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga, to incorporate young people in the process. And there was a very clear response that the issues of this country were too complex for the understanding of the young people. And I think that is the manner in which the political class views, particularly those in the opposition, view the young people. They think we don't have the capacity, or the young people generally don't have the capacity to understand what goes on in the country and cannot weave solutions. But that is to say that when you're not on the table, you can't expect that any results will come from that table that then favor you. That is particularly the reason why I think the report did not have so much take-home for the young people. But also there are a number of things that we need to consider when debating on this report. One, there is a misconception that has been out there that more people went to the streets because of the cost of living. I actually don't believe people went to the streets because of the cost of living. So many people went to the streets because their political leaders had asked them to go to the streets. That's why when the political leaders asked them back from the streets, they all stopped, and that's why we did not find any demonstrations in Kisumu, in Nairobi, and all the other places where there were heated demonstrations. Yeah. There's a reason why there are no more demonstrations, and immediately the demonstrations were called off. They could not go. There's a reason why when Azimio called for demonstrations on Monday or Wednesday, people came out, particularly in their strongholds, to go for those demonstrations. Is because they were following the directions of their leaders. So the perception that the people were demonstrating or were out picketing because of the cost of living should be kicked out completely, because the people were demonstrating, they wanted their leaders to be taken care of, their political interests to be taken care of. That I'm talking about the most common of the voter. I'm not talking about the elitist who imagines that, when the cost of fuel is high, particularly for their vehicles in Nairobi, then things are really bad. There are people out there who just want to see Raila Odinga as part of, the governance of this country. They just want to see that the ideas of the ODM party are taken care of. And that is particularly why the governance issue was coming up greatly in this report. You'll realize that the committee talked greatly about how to have the office of the official opposition leader. There was 2 deputies. Why did we have to bring in 2 deputies? In my understanding, there was a political class to be taken care of at that level. While it might not be spoken very clearly out there, the issue is there is a political leader that needs to be taken care of. Okay. When Raila Odinga is made the official opposition leader, who then becomes their deputy, you can see that the Honorable Martha Karua is already out there complaining. You can see that Honorable Eugene Wamalwa has disowned a report that he took time to prepare. There must be particular reasons why the political leaders were involved in this process. Okay. By that as it may.
But hang on. I mean, when you say that it's the people who are interested in the creation of positions for the people, for the political leaders, I mean, if you look at the common denominator and the theme with which the opposition called for the protests starting 20th of March this year, and they maintained the tone of unga, the cost of living. At some point, even Senator Edwin Sifuna Nairobi said, if the bipartisan talk will not address the issue of unga, then Baba Raila Amolo Odinga, he said, call me out from that meeting. And that was the tone that they adopted. Why then do you think the outcome of the report does not reflect the very same theme and tone that the opposition adopted on reducing the cost of living? And you saying that now it's the people who are interested in creating positions for the political class, yet it was all about lessening the cost of living and having valuable Kenyan shillings in their pockets.
We need to have 2 things right before us as we analyze that. One, we need to understand that the cost of living was actually not an issue in this debate. You'll remember that in one of the press conferences...
Was it an issue during the protests?
It was not an issue for me. Yeah. From where I said it was not an issue.
For example, why did, when you look at the street protests, Jeremiah Kioni, the Sufuria movement, and they carried that as a symbol.
Classical.
Edwin Sifuna,
classical
he had in his car, even came to this studio and said he's just ready in his car, and then he went on straight to the protest. Raila Odinga, he said it's all about the cost of living and the VAT on fuel, the finance bill at the time, which was much heated. It was, you agree with me, on the high cost of living before the talks began.
Classical Kenyan politician. They'll always take advantage of what is the grievance of the people to advance their own interests. Look at it this way. The president who is currently sitting in office acknowledged even during his campaigns that the cost of living was hitting the roof. The opposition alike, even when they were campaigning, indicated that the cost of living was unbearable. So at the very onset, everybody agreed that the cost of living was an issue, right? But now, because things were becoming a little tighter, acknowledged even by the current president, the opposition took advantage of this to advance their interests, which is the reason why, even as at now, and I actually find the pronouncements by the opposition a great they're imputing high-level incompetence on the part of Mr. Kalonzo Musyoka, because this is a position where the opposition has come up with members of a committee to go and weave solutions, and they have branded this committee as to be the solution, as to be the one that is going to give solutions on the cost of living. Then they come again to say that the committee has been defeated to give us the solution. So I wonder how then Kalonzo Musyoka want to contest for the presidency of this country when given an opportunity to find a solution, he's been defeated. But that is why I was saying this.
Yeah.
The cost of living as it is supposed to be handled, and I was here last time and I told you, I don't think a committee can sit down and converse and give us solutions on the cost of living. The imagination of a Kenyan at the common level is that this committee would have given us a solution in the sense that we have said the president is supposed to give us subsidies for unga. We have given a recommendation that the cost of fuel should be reduced by this much percentage. That is not how a country would have been run in the first place. The cost of living, in my view, should be attended to systematically in the manner in which this government is doing it. Are we talking about subsidizing production? That is what exactly they're doing. Are we talking about dealing with compartmentalizing agriculture, allowing our farmers to be registered? That is the way in which we can deal with the issues of the cost of living.
Okay.
But demanding that a report then declares that the cost of living has gone down and that everybody will go out there and clap that the cost of living has gone down, that would be asking for...
If I may add on to what, if I may add on to what my friend Ascon is saying, we cannot really separate politics from the economy. And when Ascon talks about campaign promises that were made by the current president, we are reminded of how he talked about a bottom-up transformation agenda, which he's now calling the better agenda that he's running in his government. I think this government got into office under the pretense that they're going to transform our economy. And that is what Kenyans elected. When you elect, when you get married to someone, there are things that you are expecting. There are some expectations you have from that marriage, from that union. But what Kenyans elected, what Kenyans supported in 2022 last year is not what they are getting at the moment. Kenyans elected, Kenyans were expecting to see the cost of living going down. They expected to see that they are able to access services better, because Ruto campaigned and stood on top of cars and said that Uhuru Kenyatta is a problem we have in this country, Raila Odinga is a problem we have in this country, and once those people are out of the picture, we'll be able to run this country better. But what has happened? He's making mistakes left, right, and center. He has not been able to put this country together. I think he thought that there are two things in politics. There's campaigning and getting into office, and then there's the aspect of governance. We may have perfected the art of getting into office, how you lie to Kenyans, the way he lied to Kenyans, but then there's getting into office and getting the work done. And that is something the Kenya Kwanza administration has failed completely.
Okay, when we get back from the break, I'll start with you, Gabriela, and Ayodi. It seems that the political class is now singing from the same hymn sheet, and I'll be quoting what Odinga had said largely on the areas that the committee agreed upon. The hashtag on X is Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. When we get back from the break, we continue with the discussion here on the broadcast. Stay tuned.